COVID pandemic changed the history of humanity forever. With the surge of the number of individuals contracting COVID, vaccination may not be the best option, but it's the most viable option to take as of now. However, the isolated cases of people experiencing side effects and people dying, plus further sensationalism by media companies, it becomes very difficult for the government to appeal to the intellect of general public. Mandatory vaccination becomes necessary and justified. How will mandatory vaccination work? The government will require or force people to be vaccinated regardless of their age and social status. Those who will not follow will be met with penalty. But few clarifications. 1. The vaccines that will be used must be recommended and approved by competent health authorities, i.e. World Health Organization, DOH, and FDA of respective countries. Second, we will maintain current efforts of educating people about COVID vaccines. Third, it's a given fiat in this debate that there's an existing and continuous supply of COVID vaccines for each country, because to say otherwise, that would mean that there will be no debate. So no, money is not an issue. My argument coupled with three premises. There's a compelling state interest for the government to require or force people to be vaccinated, which is public health. First premise, people make medical decisions on the basis that they trust the medical procedures and systems in place. For example, if you are filthy rich haciendera like Cincho Villar, you're more likely to opt for heart surgery in USA because of its advanced medical technology and because you trust that system even more than what we have in our country. Therefore, in order for you to encourage people to be vaccinated, they have to trust that COVID vaccines are 100% safe and effective in the first place. Based on clinical trials, Pfizer is 95% effective, Moderna 94%, Sputnik 92%, Novavax 89%, and the deaths are 1 over 10,000 compared to successful cases of vaccination. But the problem is, the discussion on the issue as to whether COVID vaccines work became emotionalized rather than logical. You've seen television and media companies exaggerating deaths of people due to COVID vaccines. Obviously, the shock and fear of seeing people die on television appeals to people's emotions and discourages people to take the vaccine. Second premise, there's no absolute freedom uh, of right to choice and right to bodily autonomy. This is consistent with the principle in political law, which is social contract theory, which states that people surrender some of their rights to the government, and in return, the government protects their exercise of some other rights. And moreover, when your choice harms other people, the government intervenes with your choice. These principles are applicable with the mandatory vaccination. You have no absolute right to your medical decisions for your body because you're given protection by the state and through public hospitals and social services, as well as your choice might result to you being infected and infecting others later on. Third premise, requiring vaccination is beneficial for so many ways. First, the government is able to save time and resources and lessen deaths because they are able to make people more immune to COVID as soon as possible, to the extent that educating people might work. But the question that opposition has to answer is, until when? Second, people are more likely to trust medical science and its community. When people see that vaccines are indeed effective and safe, they are more likely to reject exaggerated portrayal of effects of COVID vaccines, since their own personal experiences rebut these existing assumptions. In conclusion, we achieved the goal of saving more lives and rebuilding the broken trust to medical science and medical community through mandatory vaccination. It's only when people have their own personal experiences that we're able to combat and change the narrative that COVID vaccines do not work in status quo. Thank you.
Coronavirus is a type of common virus that affects humans, resulting to respiratory infection. Different types of coronavirus have been identified in the recent years, and we're familiar with SARS, MERS, and of course the novel COVID-19, which is the subject of this debate. The earliest reports of coronavirus infecting humans were in 1960s. That's about 60 years ago. Since then, no vaccine exclusively for coronavirus had been formulated and approved. Our mighty Prime Minister himself agrees by saying that vaccination may not be the best option. In April 2021, just recently, the Strategic Advisory Group of Experts issued a statement telling the public, among others, that new data continues to regularly emerge from ongoing clinical trials on monitoring vaccines. Trials. The WHO defines trials as type of research that studies and evaluates the effects of something on human health. These are carefully designed, reviewed, and completed, and needed to be approved before they can even start. Vaccine development is a long, tedious process. It's a complex process, often lasting 10 to 15 years and involving combination of public and private collaboration. The World Health Organization itself admits that vaccines are developed through a series of complex steps that can take many years, not months. Kevin Fraser, the CEO of Merck, said that we cannot rush science because if you would insist, may I take you back in 1976 when thousands of lives of people were compromised after getting the swine flu vaccine, but ended up with Guillain-Barré syndrome. We cannot discount as well the side effects, which our Prime Minister called as isolated cases. These side effects take some time before they manifest, and we know that. May I present to you some factual points that we need to understand before we proceed? As of speaking, we have over 110 population. You may check your PSA demographic profile. It will reveal that 65 million Filipinos are aged 18 to 59 years old. The rest of these are the vulnerable sectors of the elderly and the youth. Question, would you want to subject this population to something that is not even proven yet? To the isolated cases of side effects? As the vaccine adverse event reporting system, it will tell you not about nausea and muscle pain. It will tell you about death, permanent disability, premature birth, and many others due to anaphylaxis, the causal relationship of this to vaccination. Name one vaccine that would qualify to what we call the science behind vaccine research and testing. Nay, out of 4.5 trillion general appropriations for 2021, 173 billion is intended for a COVID response program. But with your proposition, the government will be spending 143 billion to be able to vaccinate the total population of the country, depleting all other health programs' budget. Question, would you allow that? And you talk about emotions versus logic. What about ethics? In Jacobson versus Massachusetts, the U.S. Supreme Court held that the mandatory vaccination for smallpox is actually a valid exercise of police power. However, it says that the only exception to mandatory vaccination is an offer of apparent or reasonably certain proof that the vaccination would seriously impair health or probably cause death. And that is true to the Philippines because what you intend to give to our seemingly guinea pig countrymen is a vaccine which is hastily faked. May I call your attention to the spirit of Abdullahi versus Pfizer, which amplified the meaning of non-consensual medical experimentation in humans. May I also invite you to revisit the Nuremberg Code. These two speak of consent of human subject being an absolute essential. This is a question of personal responsibility versus erroneous interpretation and imposition of police power. Present us data. Present us benefits. We say no to uncertainty. We say no to disrespect to human rights, to individual rights, and to the rule of law. convince us that to be vaccinated is the only responsible and ethical act that people can do in this time of pandemic.
Progressive reforms are often hinged on increased accountability, transparency, and people's active participation. For example, the reason as to we were able to achieve discounts on medicines and hospitalization for the marginalized senior citizens in PWDs is because people actively demanded formal welfare policies in the system. This is the reason why the government was pressured to account and be transparent of the 15 billion funds in PhilHealth because Filipinos were actively looking where the funds are spent. Same goes for mandatory vaccination. When everyone is required or forced to be vaccinated, every single person already becomes an active part, which tends to be directly benefited or disadvantaged in case of poor vaccination system. They will fear that if the vaccine goes wrong, they may suffer the side effects of it, or worse, die in the process, as shown in isolated cases. Government has an increased incentive to allocate funding for medical research and development. The reality is research and development is one of the most underappreciated sector in the government. Like the Philippines, where research funding was cut to 76 million in 2020. By making vaccine mandatory, you force countries to allocate more budget for such meaningful undertaking. The reason why third world countries like Philippines are dependent on vaccine donations from Western countries, or the reason as to why they were not able to develop their own vaccine is that because of the fact that these countries are poor, but because coronavirus hit their countries. The budget were allocated on the things that they thought must be prioritized, like investing in military and national security. Therefore, leaving little no budget for medical research and development right now. The healthcare system is benefited for many reasons. First, by making vaccine mandatory to everyone, it sparks public discourse as to how public health care system must be improved. Further, in terms of vaccines injections, hospital tools and facilities, and even as well as salaries of the nurses and doctors. Everyone will realize that these matters are also social issues which deserves greatest consideration. Second, it makes us a country self-sustaining and advanced in terms of medical science and technology. Given that it will have more resources to spend on for discovery of COVID treatment and treatment to any other virus and diseases like cancer, HIV, and malaria. In conclusion, the benefits of mandatory vaccination extend even in the long term. Not only we're able to save lives today, but we're able to save lives of our children in the future with improved public health care system. You right now ends when the right of others begin. Your right of choice to not to be vaccinated is a right, but the state should not protect.
Amidst the urgency of the COVID-19 crisis, restraint on civil liberties is out of bound. An agreement for a middle ground is a condition sine qua non to facilitate a more unified and more progressive strategy to combat the adverse situation. However, imposing a mandatory vaccination attached with a penal clause can be considered by the majority as a coercive method that might lead to a divided society. Hence, it can hinder such progressive reforms since not all are similarly situated. Some have different health concerns across age brackets. To achieve that middle ground, the vaccination initiative of the government must be at the option of the one taking it. Here is my claim. Mandatory vaccination attached with a penal clause is a coercive method that will lead to a divided society. For my first premise, The mandatory vaccination of the government conceivably will form an adverse effect, thus resulting in an increased vaccine wariness. To this day, the trust of the Filipino citizens in the government slowly declines, as reflected from their incompetent action towards the COVID-19 crisis. They borrowed millions of dollars from other countries. However, their response is lacking, and the transparency is such is not available to the public. Moreover, there are attempts by vaccine manufacturers such as Pfizer, which has a higher efficacy rate as compared to its other counterpart, to supply the Philippines with their vaccines. However, the government still opts to choose Sinovac, which has a significantly lower rate and has side effects that are adverse to certain people with different age brackets. In this wise, to force Filipino to submit to a vaccine clouded by doubts and uncertainty is a blatant disregard to their health that would spark disagreement between the people and the government, especially if attached with a penal clause, which can lead to vehement refusal to abide by the government's action. For my second premise, the vaccination initiative by the government should be in consideration of fairness. The COVID-19 crisis is of transcendental importance that affects the very lives of every citizen. Hence, everyone is aware of its danger and is most familiar with the preventive measure to avoid contracting it. In achieving the middle ground, the government must accord the right of choice to the people, whether or not to be vaccinated or to have the capacity to choose on what type of vaccine he or she is most comfortable with injecting. Everyone has the moral obligation to prevent the spread of the virus. As Filipinos, we are for the bayanihan aspect of our culture. Therefore, everyone is concerned with the well-being of one another. Being accorded with the right of choice promotes fairness through which it can be an instrumentality for the betterment of COVID-19 response through consolidated action. Inferring to all the aforementioned premises, to recapitulate, the mandatory vaccination attached with a penal clause will unquestionably bring a great divide between the government and its people. Taking into consideration the harm done is much greater than the benefit of the said vaccine. There has to be a vivid verdict since it's the health of the people that we're putting on the line. The people must be accorded the right of choice, and if present, all can work in unison to achieve a common objective, overcome and survive this crisis. Together, as a collective whole, the government and its people must respond with maximum efficacy towards an action plan that consolidates an interconnected and integrated response. This matter is not only about the welfare of the people, this is a matter of the state's survival.
On either in government side or opposition side, death is a reality in this pandemic. The 17,000 deaths will always be the number, regardless of whether you have the policy of mandatory vaccination or not. So, therefore, this is a question of comparison and extents. There are two questions that we will answer in this debate. First, is there a legal and moral justification for to make the vaccination mandatory? Please note, ladies and gentlemen, that opposition side is yet to present what exactly does their team want to happen in this debate. Because in government side, we are very clear even from the beginning that we want to save more lives and we accepted that there are necessary trade-offs and harms that we are willing to accept the fact that in some cases there are side effects and the fact that some people might be dying due to this vaccination. But The problem is, opposition side cannot deny the fact that there are tiny minority of people who are benefited from this injection of COVID vaccination. I suggest that they look these success stories on the internet, right? Because they're available on the internet. The opposition side, moreover, are quite unsure what they want to pursue in this debate and what their goals are. They said that, you know what, COVID vaccines are dangerous right now, and therefore you shouldn't make it mandatory. That's their claim. Two questions, right? Two questions on that. First, is it in your best position then to allow people to freely decide whether or not to take the vaccine? Or second, is it in your position then to disallow people to freely decide all across the board? First, on making people decide on their own, we already talked to you about how is it likely that people are going to take the vaccine in the first place, right? Because they're quite skeptical. And because of this skepticism, it's only a matter of time when they will be infected by the COVID virus, right? But the second thing is, if you try to understand that the principle behind mandating, we are actually targeting the urgency of the problem. So that is something that they never rebutted to on their side of the house. It's about time and urgency. Second, on disallowing people to take the vaccine, I want I want to make a cost benefit analysis here, right? So you have 10 people for mandatory vaccine as a sample. Three of three or four of them can potentially die due to the side effects of the vaccine, and we accepted that. But at least we are able to save six people out of those 10 people, right? Who are potentially at risk of dying. On the opposition side, you are allowing people, the 10 of them, to die because they have no vaccines at all. So in terms of cost benefit analysis, the people in opposition side are more likely to be at risk of contracting COVID as opposed on our side. Think of that. Second question, where do we restore trust to our institutions, e.g. government and medical community? Deputy Leader of Opposition raised a valid point. People are in great stress because of government's terrible response. So on our side, we force people to become active and critical partners about these vaccines. Since everyone now is an indispensable stakeholder of the vaccination since it's mandatory, people will actively criticize the government for poor and terrible response to COVID pandemic, to the way that the vaccines are being dispensed, right? We agree that we have a movement now which condones government inaction. So on our side, we further empower this movement in order to continuously make government transparent and accountable. That is how you build trust to the government and improve the quality of medical research and development, since people now will demand more accountability and more transparency. It is only when we further empower this movement through their personal experiences, when they get to experience how it is being injected by by the COVID vaccination. Also, it's unacceptable for their side to say that requiring everyone to be vaccinated, we're substantially depleting resources of the state. That's not true. First, health is also and must also be a priority. Second, we are wasting lots of money in the Philippines right now, like the military, which is not necessarily a priority, right? Lastly, to the extent that we are depleting our resources, at least we are ensuring that they will have a safe and effective vaccine for everyone. We are more happy with that.
As much as we all want this once in a century pandemic to end, we all need to be safe from the virus itself and the adverse effects of medicine and vaccinations. While some still has confidence in vaccines, some people have lost their confidence in vaccines because of the previous fiasco that happened in our government, or whether it was politically motivated or not is up for debate. It has affected the confidence of people in vaccines in general. Since our government has given priority to low efficacy vaccines coming from authoritarian states, mandatory vaccination should not be the end game for this, for our own safety. The World Health Organization said it would be down to individual countries as to how they want to conduct their vaccination campaign against the disease. But the UN Health Agency instead making it mandatory to get immunized against the disease would be the wrong road to take, adding that there were examples in the past of mandating vaccines and see it backfire with greater opposition to the vaccines. According to Kate O'Brien, director of the World Health Organization Immunization Department, mandating vaccines isn't the way to go. It is much better for them to encourage and facilitate vaccinations without these kinds of requirements. As much as vaccines is a good news for all of us, it is still convincing and persuasion that it is needed according to the World Health Organization. According to the WHO Emergencies Director Michael Ryan, he also said that all of them who work in the public health would rather avoid it as a means of people getting vaccinated. It is much better rather to present people with data and statistics and let them make up their minds about being vaccinated or not. Governments of the world should make vaccination voluntary and not mandatory. For one, it is for safety purposes, especially when vaccines have low efficacy. There should be no discrimination on those who opt not to be vaccinated, like not being allowed to travel or work. Only those who are willing should get it. If one is okay to be at risk of a vaccine that has at least 70 side effects according to a Chinese vaccine expert, which is one of the vaccines that is being procured by our government, then yes, there should. And according to a Chinese expert from Taiwan News, and as of April 9, 2021, phase 3 trials have not yet been conducted in one of the vaccines ordered by the national government. Then yes, there should be informed consent about the side effects of these vaccines, and there must be protocols before one administers the vaccines, like identifying and executing those who want and does not want to take the vaccine.